Welcome back to The Heat. Leaders from many of the world's leading nations are gathered in Hamburg, Germany for the G20 summit. Issues like trade and security are on the agenda. Let's continue our discussion now with our panel. Vladimir Golstein, let me start with you this time round. President Trump and President Vladimir Putin of Russia held a meeting on Friday. It was a highly anticipated meeting. Everything was being analyzed, from their handshake to their body language, and of course to what they discussed as well. This is what they had to say at that meeting. Let's watch.
If we want to solve bilateral issues and the most acute international issues, then of course we need personal meetings. I'm delighted to meet you personally, Mr. President.
We look forward to a lot of very positive things happening for Russia, for the United States, and for everybody concerned. And it's an honor to be with you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Vladimir, what is your assessment of how that meeting went?
I think this meeting was very successful. For starters, we know that it went on for 2 hours and 20 minutes, much longer than expected. Apparently, they hit it off right away. They felt comfortable with each other. And they start discussing forward-looking issues. You know, there was a comment afterwards by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who more or less addressed that. He said, rather than sort of, you know, going back to the history, you did this or you did that, and exchanging sort of accusations and being unproductive, they're looking forward to certain things. And there is a very much important, you know, dimension to that, because these are two countries which can annihilate not just each other, but the whole world. So that's important for them to talk with each other, to have rapport, to have a relationship, because this is, you know, fundamental issue. There are a lot of issues are going to be discussed on G20, from, you know, as you mentioned, security and climate change and economics and trade. But, you know, if there is a, God forbid, nuclear war, all issues become irrelevant. So these leaders, statesmen, and I'm, you know, they're aware of that, and I'm very glad that they are trying to, you know, going from one issue to another, from Syria to, you know, to Ukraine, to hacking, to North Korea, but they're trying to sort of to pick up the pieces and somehow diffuse the situation. So I think from what you know, I read, you know, of course everybody puts their own spin on that. Russians put their spin, Americans put their own spin, but it sounds like it was a very good meeting, and I think it diffused the tensions, and at least now, before sort of accusing each other and threatening each other, I'm sure these two leaders will talk to each other.
Brian, listening to a point there that President Putin made in that piece of tape that we showed, he made the point that face-to-face talks are very important to address bilateral issues, to international concerns. It's okay having telephone calls, but they need that kind of personal contact and to build their relationship. How important is it that these two leaders continue this dialogue?
Well, you know, the whole idea of summits, leaders of the Soviet Union in the past, or Russia today, or China and the United States, became in vogue in the late 1950s as a way to try to find a way out of the Cold War. And the Cold War wasn't that cold. It was Korea and it was Vietnam, very hot, and again threatened annihilation for the entire species. So the discussion between leaders was considered essential for some sort of discussion, ultimately détente, rapprochement. But I think we have to also look behind or beyond the atmospherics here. What happened was that there was a ceasefire agreement that was worked out in advance of this meeting, calling for Russia and the United States to work together in southwest Syria for a possible ceasefire. Now, the U.S. had possible ceasefires before with John Kerry when he was Secretary of State and the Obama administration, but I think the Pentagon actually sabotaged them because the Pentagon wasn't ready for it. The question is, will the entire Washington establishment now unify around a new peace initiative in Syria? Also, the day before the meeting, the Trump administration nominated Kurt Volker, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and more importantly, perhaps, the executive director of the McCain Institute, someone who's very hostile to Russia and is very close to Victoria Nuland and those who were, I would say, the Western architects of the change of government that led to the overthrow of the Yanukovych government February 22nd, 2014. Russia will perceive that at the very moment that Putin and Trump are meeting to be sort of an affirmation of a hostile policy towards Russia in the case of Ukraine. And of course, Volker is now in charge of Ukraine negotiations. So I think we're seeing the Trump administration send mixed signals beyond and before the actual meeting with Putin. So again, this is a very unsettled moment for U.S.-Russian relations. Even if Trump wants to have better relations, there's a lot of institutional power in the United States, in Washington, within the military-industrial complex that might think, well, that's not really where we want to go.
Right. Let me go to Ambassador Hill on that very point. Ambassador, do you think that these two leaders can make substantive progress on international issues, given that President Trump's room to maneuver, if I could put it that way, is possibly restricted by the domestic political climate?
Well, first of all, I think it was a very good thing that they met. It was a very good thing that they had a lengthy meeting, in fact. And it was also very good that it's pretty clear that Rex Tillerson had done a lot of work in preparing for that meeting. I mean, that Syrian ceasefire, albeit in a small area of southwestern Syria, was nonetheless a pretty major accomplishment. And perhaps more importantly, the ceasefire is going to lead to a political process, which is what Syria has lacked all along. I mean, if you have a ceasefire that's disconnected from an eventual political process, I can assure you that ceasefire is not going to last long. So I think these were very positive developments today, and I think it really reflects the work of Mr. Tillerson. I'm actually pleased that he has selected an envoy for Ukraine. I think Tillerson's main problem in the State Department is he's been very slow, for whatever reason, to get a team in place that can kind of work these issues day to day, because these issues cannot just be discussed episodically every month or every time there's a G20 meeting.
Victor, the meeting between President Trump and President Xi is something else that is another meeting that is going to be highly anticipated. What do you expect to come out of that?
Indeed, the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump will be the second time they meet face-to-face after the Mar-a-Lago meeting in April. And I would say the more these two leaders can meet, the better for China, for the United States, and also for the rest of the world. There are many things to talk about between China and the United States, in addition to trade, and the 100-day period for the discussions is coming to an end very soon. There are major other issues, including most likely the DPRK, and then from the Chinese perspective, why the United States warships and other military equipment keep, coming into the Chinese territorial water in the South China Sea, and also the U.S. Position of selling more arms to Taiwan, and also a recent Senate subcommittee resolution tried to authorize the U.S. naval ships to port in Taiwan ports. All these are very, very dangerous developments. They are no longer just irritants in China-U.S. relations. And I'm sure President Xi Jinping wants to reach out to President Donald Trump and try to really strike for a more healthy and constructive course for China-U.S. relations. From the Chinese perspective, we cannot tolerate the situation where the United States wants to have the cake and eat it at the same time. You want to have better relations, you want our cooperation on DPRK, fine, we'll do our best.
Right.
But then you cannot, poke us in the side on other major issues of vital national interest to China.
Okay. Ambassador Hill, very quickly, I've just got a few seconds left. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, she wants to move on with the climate change talks, the Paris Accord. What are your expectations at this G20 summit?
Well, I think a lot of Americans would like to see President Trump rethink that decision to pull out of the climate change accord. I think it reduces American influence, and frankly, I think it hurts America economically. Whether Mr. Trump will do that will depend on certain calculations he's making, including political calculations. But I think in the meantime, Angela Merkel has really stepped up and has shown a great deal of leadership in Europe, and I think that's very positive.
Okay.
And I think many of us would like to see a change in U.S. policy there.
Okay. And Victor, what would the Chinese be looking for insofar as climate change is concerned from this summit? Very quickly.
I think China is fully committed to do the right thing for the climate change and to protect the environment. If the United States chooses to drop by the roadside, other major countries, including China and Germany and many other developed countries and developing countries, need to do the right thing. We need to keep walking in the right direction.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. Thank you.